I enjoy being introduced to activities and cultures that I know little about, and I'll bet you do too. That's one of the reasons I love producing this podcast, and probably why you're listening. I'm Tom Hailey, and this is my Bluegrass Region Voices and Views podcast, where I have conversations with creative and inspiring people around the Bluegrass region of Kentucky. My guest is Kali Mattheus. She is the creator, host, and producer of the Foodies Reviewing Movies Podcast. Kali introduced me to things going on around central Kentucky that I was not familiar with, but that are now on my to-do list for 2024. Drop in on our conversation as Kali is telling us where she was born and raised.
So I was born and raised in Jacksonville, Florida. For the most part, I've moved about 23 times. So it's been an experience with the moving. We moved a lot because my parents actually were pretty much HGTV before it was a thing. They would flip houses. We'd live somewhere for about 2 years and then move on to the next house. And so that's why we moved so much. But between Jacksonville, Fort Lauderdale, back to Jacksonville, we were all over the state of Florida for several years. So it was definitely interesting when you look back now as an adult to when you're a kid. And as a kid, you hate moving around because you're having to make new friends and go to new schools. And I've been to about 10 schools as well. My mom being in the education system, she went from being a public school teacher to a private school administrator. And part of the private school was the Lutheran school system. So she would move job to job. And anytime she'd go, I'd go with her because in South Florida, the schools were not quite as safe when I was there. So my mom wanted to keep me in a school that she felt was going to be a good environment for me to be in. And henceforth, me moving from school to school and house to house throughout my childhood. Yeah. So, but now looking back as an adult, I can say that helped form who I am now at being able to be versatile, being able to just sort of go with the flow to an extent.
Do you have brothers and sisters?
I have one younger sister. She's 7 years younger. And she and I, since we were quite a few years apart, we're not very close when we were growing up, but as adults, we've become a lot closer. And she's I'm very proud of her. She's gone into the psychology field, and she works as now a administrator in a psychiatrist office.
Okay. Yeah. So she got to, you had her to move with anyway when you were moving.
Exactly.
So that was good. So, well, what's the first memory that you have, like going back as far as you can?
Yes. So first memory was when I was about 3 years old. We had moved from Jacksonville to Fort Lauderdale. We moved to the area of Weston. And that was about 4 months prior to Hurricane Andrew coming and just completely ravaging the state. I mean, there were birds and other animals that got out of the zoo when this hurricane had hit. And part of that is why the Everglades now has so many issues with the snakes, because the snakes, there's boa constrictors and pythons that have gotten into the waters, and they've now consumed about 80% of the natural inhabitants of the Everglades. So that's sort of the tipping point of where that all started. But during the hurricane, we're sort of just hunkering down, and there comes a point where my dad's like, okay, this is the calm of the storm. We're in the eye. I'm going to go get something from my truck. What it was, I don't know what it was, why he wanted to do it, but he wanted to go get this thing from his truck. And he said, come with me. And of course, there's a little bit of protest because you just dealt with hours of the storm raging outside. My dad said, it's fine. We're going to be safe. I remember walking out. It's completely just charcoal colored out, and it's still. There's even though you can see the clouds moving, there's no feeling of a wind around you, which even now I'm saying it, I'm getting chills because it's just so eerie to think about, but a really unique experience. And I remember looking up and seeing what looked like a donut hole or a kaleidoscope kind of circle in the sky. And you can just see this beautiful blue, the clearest blue you've ever seen. So you're seeing just this gray around you and this tiny poke of hope above all of that. And so that's my first memory I've had of, just experiencing that, just so visceral. And remember opening the door at one point and just like a little like wave of tiny frogs tried to get into the apartment.
Oh my. Wow.
So wow. It was quite the time. We had a window break and the cat, I remember, was like, wow, real, fast and ran away. And, we're sitting in the hallway with a little TV, like radio kind of setup, just sort of waiting for it to end. So.
Well, maybe you can remember that you did survive.
Yes,
that's
exactly.
part of your DNA now. So, well, what was the first job that you had where you actually got paid in American dollars?
American dollars. Yeah. I worked at a retirement home for about 5 years. When I was a freshman in college, I started there. It was a Heartland Hills retirement home here in Lexington, Kentucky. And I worked as a server. I worked as housekeeping, pretty much anything just to try and make ends meet. And it was definitely a learning experience. There's a lot of interesting people you can meet. Met a lady who, her husband at one point was head of the FBI. And I believe she has passed at this point, rest her soul. And she still believed that they were coming for her. So she kept her curtains drawn and was very secretive when she was talking.
Yeah.
But I met people who became sort of like additional grandparents. And, whenever I'd hear of one of them passing, it was hard to hear because you grew to love them, even though sometimes some of them like to push your buttons.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, sometimes literally they poke at you.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Stuff. Well, when you were in elementary and like your early high school years, what types of things at that time did you dream about doing at this time?
That's a great question. So I, of course, had a lot of different ideas run through my brain. One point, I wanted to be a veterinarian, which is a pretty blanket answer from any kid, but also an oceanographer, specifically just living in Fort Lauderdale for about a decade of my childhood. That was a very prominent thing, was the ocean. And so between watching the movie Free Willy, which was one of my favorite movies as a kid, in about 4th or 5th grade, I went on a field trip and we were specifically going to a sandbar. And while we were there, we had these little clear containers and we would scoop them through the water, see what we could pick up. And at one point I had picked up a seahorse that started to give birth.
Oh, wow.
And it was an incredible experience just seeing these hundreds of little babies and seeing life happen. And that definitely has stuck now to this day very, very vividly in my mind. So that was one thing that I wanted to do. I also at one point wanted to be a hockey player because of the movie Mighty Ducks. You'll see this theme here. Movies were very influential as a kid. Then I went on to wanting to be a writer and an artist and an actress, and eventually landed on filmmaker because I liked taking pictures, but also I did want to be in front of the camera at one point. And so I said, oh, well, if I'm behind it, maybe I can get in front of it, but then just fell in love with being behind it.
Okay.
So, and then a chef as well at a certain point. So I've kept all of those to an extent with me through adulthood.
So when you had these thoughts of being involved with filmmaking, TV or movies, what age did that start?
That started, so I decided I wanted to be a writer after I saw The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. It was, to me, completely life-altering in terms of just the writing and the actual cinematography. So that was about 7th, 8th grade.
Okay.
And then I ended up seeing this movie called Green Street Hooligans in 11th grade. And it was about a guy who's actually played by Elijah Wood, who was also in Lord of the Rings. He goes over to England and his brother-in-law is involved with, or was at one point, a football group. And so he sort of gets entrenched into that a bit. And I found out that it was directed by a female director. And for me, that completely flipped the script because you don't imagine women typically, or at least you didn't at that point in time, back in 2006-ish, as being someone who's going to produce or direct a more violent type of film or show. And for me, that was just very empowering to see. And she went on, it was Lexi Alexander who did The Hurt Locker. She was also involved with The Wild Bunch and Sam Peckinpah, which I didn't realize until after I started reading into her. So she was very influential in my thoughts of the abilities I could possibly have as a female director.
Okay. So at that time, did you have hobbies that were intertwined with those interests?
A little bit, yeah. I was doing a lot of writing at that time. I started trying to switch from more novel style to more of a screenwriting style. I was trying to be the director. I say trying. I was trying to be the director during one of our school projects, but my best friend, Catherine, she's a very strong personality. I love her to bits and pieces, but she'll take charge when she needs to, kind of thing. And so she sort of took charge from the beginning. So we were sort of going back and forth doing a dance at a certain point. Yeah. But so that was something I found I really just enjoyed, getting to be the architect of filmmaking. And that's what spurred me looking into Full Sail, which is down in Florida, and then finding out, whoa, okay, that's like $50,000 a year. Never mind. So
that's a filmmaking school.
Yeah, filmmaking school. And they also focus on music as well. And I was like, that's just too expensive. So I ended up getting into University of Kentucky here in Lexington, and I went and focused more on the videography side of things and news broadcasting.
And what year did you start at UK?
Started in 2007 and went through 2012 working as a working student. I decided to take a little bit less of hours per semester so that way I wouldn't be completely overburdened.
That's smart.
Yeah, I got to spend 5 years instead of 4, which that 5th year was really instrumental in me being able to move into the news industry. I ended up getting to direct their student newscasts and get more involved with that. I was doing 18 hours that semester, but that was more so because of the just heavily involved classes. They were like, look, you don't have homework. You come in and you direct, or you come in and you do this instead. You're doing it by show instead of book. So that was when I really excelled as a student.
I'd recommend that type of college education for anybody if they know what the field is they want to be in. Take a little longer to graduate and start working someplace doing what it is that you're studying. That's great. When you were in elementary and high school and interested in movies, I'm not able to think back to that time period of what kind of cameras existed that a child could play with. Yeah. I'm thinking of seeing pictures of Ron Howard with these cameras and things. Did you have a camera to play with?
So my parents had like the handy cams, and they were just starting to move to like the VHS tapes at that time. My parents also let me, like, for just regular cameras, just let me play with, I can't even remember what kind it was, but it had been sort of more like if you were doing a safari kind of imagining, where it is probably about 6 inches or so long and about 4 inches wide, and you had your lens stuck onto the camera, and so you could zoom it in and out. You had to pull the lever on the side to make it go to the next part of the film. And we still had film. We still had film in those cameras. Wow. Polaroids were big. My parents were fine with me playing with that. They pretty much would give me decommissioned cameras because they didn't want me to break them, understandably so. But actually playing with the cameras really didn't get to come into play for the video cameras, at least until college. Yeah. But taking just still photographs was something I could do through childhood.
Okay. Wow. It's fun to look back.
Yes.
So, I want to talk a little bit about your podcast. So, I've heard you mention, because we're in some groups together, and I've heard you talk a little bit, and I've heard you say that food has always been sort of an actual language for you, and that as we've already established here, that you have a fascination and experience and expertise in the worlds of movies and television. And those interests led you to create your podcast, which is titled Foodies Reviewing Movies.
Yes.
So let's begin with you maybe doing a little promo for your podcast. Tell us what it's about, who all hosts it. I don't know if I know that you have Leo on there with you. I'm not sure who else you have from time to time. How frequently do you do it? Where can people listen? And just whatever else you'd like to say in a promo. And also tell us, when did you have the first idea to do this podcast?
Okay, so Foodies Reviewing Movies. It's a concept. Food, movies, it can create a beautiful marriage when you have the two. I mean, when you go to a theater, usually you want to have popcorn, some kind of snacks. And so food has always been intertwined with movies to some kind of extent. But there's so many movie reviews podcasts. There's so many food reviews, but I don't really see many that combine the two. So I like to consider it as reviewing movies with a culinary twist. And I purposefully plan it out like it's a meal. So you have an amuse-bouche, which is more of a icebreaker question to sort of get you into the mode of what exactly we're going to be talking about. The apps haps, which is another section, that one's focusing on the restaurant or the specific food we're talking about. I like to promote local restaurants. I also have the cinematic entree, which is the movie review portion, but I intertwined food questions throughout, and we sort of continue to go from there. And pretty much I wanted to create this. It started in 2012, but I'd been wanting to do a podcast since about 2015. But I was lacking self-confidence, I will openly admit. I was lacking a unique approach to the topic of movie reviews. I knew I wanted to do movie reviews, but the food aspect really didn't come into play until I started listening to the Off Menu podcast. And it has two British comedian hosts, and they talk to people about their dream meal. And so they'll go through step by step. Do you want sparkling or still water? And just go from there. And I said, that's a really inspiring way to sort of approach this. And so I definitely used that inspiration to help me with my podcast. And I decided to start it when I did because we were in the midst of COVID, and that was a hard time for everybody. I actually spent the first 28 days of COVID without any kind of human contact whatsoever with anybody. I live by myself. I'm a single woman at this point in time. And so I did not see anybody. I just was able to luckily use phone calls and video chats and said, this is a time where I can get together with my friends if we do it in a safe manner and be able to talk about things we always talk about, but record it. And that's where that came into play. And really, Leo, who is James on the 13th floor, his podcast was also a big inspiration for me starting it when I did, because I would sit and listen to him and his co-hosts, Alex and Cece, who are also friends of mine from college. And I felt like I was sitting there getting to talk with a couple of my friends, and it made things less isolating at that time. And I think that's a very common consensus that's from that period of people starting to really dig into podcasts. So I decided this is a great way for my friends and I to still be able to keep in contact. And that's pretty much where we got rolling with it. And there was a lot of speed bumps along the way because you're trying to figure out what you're doing. But, as they say, start off ugly but then end things beautifully. And so that's where we've come from and where we've gone to. But we release on Fridays, which I just finished about a 3-month hiatus. And by the time this episode of your podcast drops, I will have started having mine drop again. So every Friday of each week, season will now be going from about 25 episodes to about 15. I want to focus more on quality instead of quantity. So I want to make sure I'm giving the listeners something really just that's a, like, they're walking away going, oh yeah, I learned new things. This sounded great. And there was a lot of time spent on it. And you can tell, that's more of a focus for me now at this point.
Well, I have heard Leo on at least 3 of your shows that I've listened to. When we're talking here about Leo York, who, if you're a person who's listening wants to go back and hear Leo, he was on one of my podcasts a few months ago. So you can look that up. But Did you all were college friends?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. We met I think it was our sophomore year of college. We were in a writing class,
Okay.
and our friendship has, survived since then and has
Yeah.
been able to actually flourish into a partnership for a business, which I'll definitely discuss
Super.
here shortly. But yeah, so he's been one of my regular rotating guests. It's myself, and then I'll have pretty much it's been mostly just my friends on, but I am now going to be expanding to talking with chefs from restaurants, having them on so that way they can promote their restaurants, because that is a very big portion. I want to be able to support local businesses, and also having people that I know who are from the film industry coming on. I know someone who's a dog trainer. I want to be able to talk to her about her dog training and her experiences doing that, because her dogs have been in some movies and some commercials for like Chewy and stuff like that.
That works.
So, yeah. And so just sort of getting to actually bring those career fields more into the actual podcast now.
Well, when you made that decision to start a podcast, did you understand the technology and all of that, or did you have a big learning curve? Or?
It was on the fly. Leo was a major component of me learning how to do it, because he had been doing it for about a year and a half, I think, at that point. So I asked him, look, I know a little bit about the basics, but what do I really need to do in order to make this happen? So I would constantly be picking his brain. I would not be surprised at some point he's like, this woman just needs to stop asking me questions, but no, he's been very gracious in helping me become more educated with podcasting. So now I like to share my mistakes with people, because I feel like that's some of the biggest learning tools you can ever have. What's the point of being embarrassed? Like, let's learn from it and let's get better, Sure.
So I'm sure we have other podcasters listening to us. And one of the things that podcasters, I think, are always interested in is how much time do you spend doing an episode? So how long is a typical episode of yours, and how many hours from start to finish do you probably spend producing it?
That is always a fun question, because initially when I started, so 2021, so we're looking at 2 years ago now, which is just insane to think about. Initially when I started, it took me probably about 8 to 10 hours on an episode. And that was mostly the recording and editing portion. But then there's also the pre-production. You've got to do your watching of the movie, the researching. You've got to eat your food. You've got to do all these different things. But luckily now I've gotten it to where if you're excluding actually watching the movie itself, because that's a big chunk of time, outside of watching the movie, I would say it probably takes about 4 to 6 hours for doing additional research, for getting with the person that'll be with me on the show, sort of going through with a rundown of things they want to talk about, what I want to talk about, and actually doing the editing. I like my podcast. There's a sweet spot I've learned in podcasting, which is about 45 minutes. And so I try and get the podcast as close to possible. But an episode that I recently just recorded, which was of the 1995 classic Congo with a friend of mine, Kenny, we talked about the snacks from the 90s for about 20 minutes. And so we're going to be cutting some of that out. But so we want to make it closer to be about 45 minutes. But the whole process was, I'd say, probably about 4 to 6 hours now.
Sure.
On
Okay.
An episode.
And you try to do one a week. So
I try and drop one a week. And which right now I do, and I've learned this in any podcaster who's new to this, build up a backlog, because you never know when technology may get in the way, when something may happen in your life, because that's part of what my hiatus was. I just was dealing with a lot of personal stuff. So I decided to take a break. If I would have had a substantial backlog, I wouldn't have really probably had to pause it all. So I recommend to people having at least 5, if not possibly 10 in the can waiting.
Okay.
That way you don't have to sweat it if one week you can't record or edit.
Great. Well, talking about podcasting, that's how you and I met, and that was by attending a meeting of the Lexington Podcasters Meetup Group, which then you quickly became involved with as one of the 4 administrators for that group, or a board member, whatever it's called. So tell us a little bit about that group and what you get out of it, and maybe what you and your cohorts in that group, the administrators group, see as sort of the future of the meetup group?
Sure. So I joined about 3 years ago, and that was about a year before I started actually podcasting because I wanted to gain some kind of additional knowledge besides for just picking Leo's brain. And I met Jennifer, who is the creator, and you and several other people, John, who's one of the other board members. And I immediately learned, well, first of all, this is just a great group of people. So I want to be around them. I want to surround myself with people who are creative as well. And then I saw it as a place where you could network and you could be supported. The group is so supportive of each other. We help each other when we need it, and we offer guidance, which a community is just it's so vital to any kind of aspect of life, but especially in a creative one, to help you be able to foster that creativity and grow even more. So we have gone from weathering COVID, and we did some virtual meetings, as I know you remember, and we've gotten to luckily come back into person again. And we recently did a PodFest meetup. So PodFest is an event that happens annually down in the Orlando, Florida area, and usually gathers a couple thousand people to attend this like 3-day event. Unfortunately, I haven't gotten to go yet, but I do plan on hopefully going 2025. But they decided to take a chance on us and have a meet up here in this area. And we had a great time. There was several of us that came and were able to learn a little bit through Chris, who runs it, and be able to just support each other and expand our group as well in our community. We have a couple people who were not initially members that have now joined. One from Indiana, which is, even though they're quite a distance north, that's okay because they see that there's potential with our group. And so we are looking for fall of 2024, having our own meetup. So we were very lucky to have PodFest meetup with us, but we would also like to have one that's more focused on the people of this region and the podcasters of this area. That was more of a national overview, but this one, we want to bring it back home here to the Bluegrass.
Oh, so a conference type thing with speakers and all that. Oh, I hadn't heard about that.
Yeah, that's something that we haven't really gotten to pitch. So this is an exclusive for everybody who's listening. We would like to, what we're anticipating on doing is a day event, more like a full afternoon on a Saturday, because we did our meetup during the week, and that can be difficult with people who have full-time jobs that usually tend to be during the day to interfere with that. So we would like to bring it on to like a Saturday afternoon. We'd like to have a few speakers who have some really well-established podcast, maybe some that are newer to the game, and get to share their experiences, answer questions, tell stories, and just get to be able to gel a little bit even further as a community, and maybe get a few people who are pod curious started on theirs and get them rolling as podcasters officially.
Right. Well, as you know, and I think a lot of my listeners know, my podcast, Bluegrass Region Voices and Views, is what I consider to be a hobby cast. It's something that I'm doing at this stage of my life because I just really, really enjoy it. Is your podcast monetized, is the word that people throw around in the biz, or is it a hobby, or how do you look at that?
I would like to have it become monetized. Right now it is more hobby based, and I would like to eventually move it into a monetization tool. But for now, it's the fun podcast that I get to do in my spare time. So, but there are some things that are happening. I can't go into great detail that will eventually, hopefully, move us in that direction.
Great.
So.
Okay. Well, when that happens, you'll have to come back and tell us about it on Bluegrass Region Voices and Views.
Absolutely, be happy to.
That would be one of the advantages of a hobby cast is that I get to meet people like you and Leo and John and Jen. I would have never met you without having this as a hobby. Yeah. So there are so many payoffs to an endeavor like this, other than seeing money deposited into your checking account.
That's an absolutely great point, because, and I think this is something that definitely needs to be said. A lot of people come into this thinking they're going to become Joe Rogan, and that's not the case.
Yeah,
that's a slim slice of the pie. So if you can go into it as the mindset of, this is not going to be my full-time job. I honestly think that's when the success happens and is more likely, because I was feeling this when I started podcasting, even until a few months ago, this unnecessary pressure that you put on yourself. And a friend of mine, he said, who's going to come after you with pitchforks if you're not putting a podcast out? Nobody.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I have friends ask, hey, have you put one out? But I haven't had them say, look, if you don't do this, we're not friends anymore. No, it's supposed to be fun. And the moment that it's no longer fun and that you're starting to feel like it's work is the moment maybe you need to take a step back and really reevaluate. What is my goal with this? What am I doing?
Exactly. And I would add, I would encourage someone who is starting to feel that bit of overwhelm and thinking about backing off. And we're talking about this because we know we have podcasters listening to us. Don't sell your equipment.
Yeah.
Just put it in a box, put it away. But you're probably going to get your enthusiasm, your passion back for the project. But you do just need to step away for a while.
Yes.
But don't give up on it just yet. So
yeah.
Anything else you'd like to say about podcasting? And then I want to move on to some other things.
The one thing, because you just spurred me to thinking.
Yeah, sure.
If you need to be inspired and to be motivated, the meetings that we have, we do them on the third Monday of each month. I feel so invigorated because there have been, like I mentioned, I did take the hiatus for personal reasons. I overstretched myself beyond belief and became burnout. And that affects everything, mental health, physical health, all of the above. And you lose that love for it. I think temporarily it just becomes a burden, and that's never what I wanted it to be. So when I would go to these meetings, that was really the thing that helped continue to inspire me to keep going. So that's what it's done for me. And that's why I wanted to become even more involved in it than I initially was. I want to help guide this to be that exact same thing for someone else.
Well, so before we close the podcast discussion here, if someone's listening and they'd like to know how they can find that meeting, how they can attend, exactly where we meet typically, tell us about, do a little promo for Lexington Podcasters.
Sure. Lexington Podcasters, third Monday of each month. And we meet up usually at the Joseph Beth cafe that they have there.
Bronte Bistro.
Yeah. Yes, Bronte Bistro. It's just a great place. And we have a group on Facebook called Lexington Podcasters. You do need to request to be admitted, but all you got to do is answer 2 questions of what's the title of your podcast, or if you don't have one yet, maybe what are you considering, or I'm pod curious, but I have questions. And then another question as well, and we'll admit you in. So we just want to be a place that we have people who are genuinely interested and are not just trying to be a part of every single group, because we want everyone to get something out of it.
Sure. Great. Yeah. I think I have missed one meeting since it started. I was at the very first one, and I think I've only missed one. So I do encourage, as Kali has said, if you're interested in podcasting at all, check out one of our meetings. Well, here in 2023, what are you doing for a living? Since neither of us is making a living on our podcast, how are you keeping the lights on?
I work in educational TV currently. I've worked in the news industry. I worked at WKYT and WTVQ. Currently, I work at KET, and I work in programming and traffic there. So I feel lucky to be a part of an organization that does want to help spread the education to the state. And so I do that for my daytime job. I'm also involved in a lot of communities and organizations, one of which I'm starting myself with 2 partners.
Okay. Well, we're gonna swing right back to that real quickly here, but I just want to say that my wife and I both are KET Passport members.
Oh, thank you.
Just I don't know why I would even have a TV if it weren't for Kentucky Educational TV. So appreciate what you do there so very much. Well, let's jump right to what you just referred to, that you've got this exciting project that coming up that you're starting to invest yourself in. Is this a good time to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So myself, Leo York, who we've mentioned several times now, he might as well be a third person who's on here.
Yeah, he's here in spirit, right?
Yeah, and Sylvia Lovely, she's also part of the Lexington Podcasters. We are going to be starting a nonprofit. We're in the process of getting the groundwork laid for that now, and we're going to be focusing on archiving the history, culture, and people of our region through storytelling.
Wow.
And currently we are building some connections with other Kentucky organizations, but we want to be able to, I think the biggest point we landed on, all three of us, was be able to give a platform to people who don't normally have it, who don't normally get to have their stories told. And we'll be doing this in several different mediums. We're going to be having a project that we're working on with the Lexington Library for a podcast involving some storytelling there. We will have some video actual shows that are going to be coming out. So there's several different things we're currently cooking up. I can't go into a great deal with because we are still forming them.
Sure.
But we will have that hopefully coming here in 2024.
Oh, that's soon.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a name for it that you can divulge at this point? I guess you have to have a name for a nonprofit. Is there a name?
We are currently landing on that. So
Okay.
we're in the process of getting our bylaws together and all of the administration end of it. So the name is always the hardest part for any organization I've found. We're like, oh, we've got our mission, we've got our statement, we got everything. The name is always the most challenging because you want to be able to, this is where the challenges come in, is you're trying to think of all of the things that you want to include, not just now, but down the road. And so you have to think in the view of, well, this needs to encompass everything. Where we're at now, where we want to go. So we're in the process of narrowing it down from about 4 choices to 1.
Okay, sure. Well, we won't put any of those out there right now. Then.
Yeah.
Well, this is going to be a podcast that we are going to have to do in the future, like this time next year, get together with all of you on Bluegrass Region Voices and Views and talk about what you have just launched. Hopefully by this time next year, right?
Yes. Thank you.
I'm excited already. This is great. And you say there's going to be a film or a TV visual aspect to it.
Yes.
Well, that leads us right into the fact that you have experience in film and television besides the work that you are doing right now that you just mentioned. So tell us, go into some detail about your experience with film and television, not just when you were a kid playing with your parents' camera. So.
Yeah, well, I do. I have an extensive history now. I'm looking at about 13 years of being in some kind of filming industry of some sort, whether that's movies or TV. So I initially was an intern on a movie called Hitting the Cycle. And J. Ritchie Nash, he had come into town after writing this script. He's the son of Cotton Nash, who is the UK basketball player. And he decided he wanted to do a more coming of age, but for someone who's more middle age kind of story of them coming back home and maybe having to face some demons and all that kind of stuff. And it was focused on baseball, as he was a baseball player at one point. And we had that happen in 2010, and I worked as an intern on that, doing everything from helping with paperwork to actually directing a scene. And that was also a very pivotal moment for me of absolutely solidifying the fact that I wanted to be a filmmaker and a director. It was that absolute, okay, yeah, we're doing this moment.
Yeah.
Moved on then to, initially it was called Tan Lines, but then the name switched to Second Serve. That one has a few people who would come in from Hollywood that helped with this film. This was back in about 2011 or so, and we shot it in Louisville. It was focused on tennis players and some sort of kind of odds and ends kinds of people, sort of a group of misfits, if you would, coming in to create a team. We had Josh Hopkins, who's actually the brother of the CEO of KET, or the president of KET, Shay Hopkins. He was in there as the main role. And we had Cameron Monaghan, who was in the show Shameless and Gotham. He was in there. So we had several other names come in. All great people, such an amazing experience. I worked as a key set PA, so I was making sure that all of our PAs were where they needed to be, and had a pretty big role in getting a lot of the PAs and the interns onto that show or that movie. And then I also worked as a contractor for ESPN. I worked the UK football a couple times and UK softball, and met actually a few of my now current coworkers at KET during that experience. And then went on to news broadcasting, the 2 different stations I've mentioned. And now we're at the newest of the projects, which is the 12 Lions Film Festival. I am one of the committee members for that, and was one of the main programmers for this past year, which was our inaugural festival for this film festival, which was an international film festival. We had films that were submitted from France to Turkey to Australia. We had a gentleman come in from out of the country and was one of our speakers. We are at this point so excited to bring this. This is something I've wanted for Kentucky for some time, is to have this caliber of a film festival in Lexington, especially. And it's at the Kentucky Theater, which is now 101 years old, which is amazing. It's an incredible venue, which was a compliment we got by a lot of outer-towners who came in for the festival. And we really wanted to make sure that we were able to go ahead and showcase quality independent films, be able to support emerging filmmakers and encourage them to, continue to create. And we wanted to just celebrate art and film in this area. So we were very lucky to have as many submissions as we did. We got into triple digits, which was great, and especially for it being a first year. And it was such a fun time. So it was a 3-day event that happened at the end of September into the first weekend of October. And it was just a great weekend of being able to watch movies and connect with filmmakers. And we had some people who, I was walking through the street at one point wearing the 12 Lions Film Festival shirt, and they're like, "That's an amazing looking shirt. I want one. Where do I go?" And I was able to direct them to the Kentucky Theater. Yeah, so it just happened here in 2023, just a month and a half ago, which is insane to think about. We've already started meeting for 2024. We'll have our submission window open in January as of right now. That's what we're planning.
Okay.
And we'll have it. We always like to try and start it before Keeneland. So we're aiming for the last weekend of September of 2024.
So where does that name come from, the tall sound, TAHLSOUND?
Yeah, so the Tall Sound Music Concert Series, that comes from, it's actually an anagram for Southland Drive. And one of the guys who's one of the founders, Brandon Pittard, he came up with the name. He's like, "Oh, if we rearrange the name, then Tall Sound." And so sort of the best quote from the assistant festival director, Gareth Evans, he has said that we've ever gotten is, "Funny name, great festival." And that's spot on exactly what it is.
Like I sort of merged 2 things in my mind here. So you were talking about the 12 Lions Film Festival, and I meant to specifically ask you about the Tall Sound Music Concert Series.
Yes.
And I kind of messed that up, but I'm going to leave that in. So,
okay.
Because nobody thinks I'm real smart anyway. So tell us about that concert series.
Yeah. So it happens once, it's the 4th Sunday of each month from April through September. And it's such a great way to celebrate music in Central Kentucky and beyond. We want to make sure that we're providing a stage for local artists, and that we're offering also educational opportunities, which is part of of what a major platform is for us as an organization, we are applying for nonprofit status. Hopefully we'll have that as of 2024. And we offer a music petting zoo for the kids. We have a kids corner where they can do arts and crafts. We had Candy Mountain, which is a group that helps teach kids about music, especially reggae music focus, because we were partnered with Reggae Fest for this past season, which was year 7. And we had, I think it was like 1,200 people show up, which was the biggest number we've had for audience to date. So it was incredible to look 1 minute at this field, which it's a field that's behind the Olika Temple off of Southland Drive. It's the best hidden gem in Lexington. You had no idea it's there, but it's this completely fenced in area. So your kids are safe. So you can let them run around and just be wild and crazy for a bit while you get to sit and enjoy maybe some food or a drink and listen to the music. But getting to see this field, which looks massive as you're looking at it. And you're like, oh, well, there's not like that many people. There's maybe 100 people, right? And they're like, no, there's like 400 people here right now. And it's like, okay, well, that's crazy. And then you look back and you see the whole entire field filled, but the kids' corner. And it's just a mind-blowing experience to be able to look back every hour and see the numbers have completely just tripled, which was such a rewarding feeling, because this was my first year being involved as a videographer. And I just sort of happenstance got to stumble onto this opportunity, and it's such a fun time. And KET actually has come and done some videography for the event. We will have a segment that's going to be coming out on Kentucky Life, which was one that I did nominate to try and produce. Unfortunately, that did not happen, as I'm not part of the production part of our organization, but one of our producers, Reeve Dalton, is the producer for it, who I'm good friends with. And I was able to have them come, and they shot video, and then 2 or 3 of them from the crew were like, this was a pretty fun time. And now they come each month to hang out and watch music and listen to music.
I did not know that there was a big field behind the Shriners building on Southland Drive. So is that accessible through the Shriners property? I mean, is it part of their property? Yeah,
so it's something that they do own. They own that land, and they built a stage. It's actually an Amish built stage, which is really cool. Yeah. And it's been there, I think, for about 12 years now. And the field, though, has been there for a very long time. And you're able to, it's right behind the Shriners and Winchells, and there's a dollar store there. It's directly behind the dollar store. And then there's like the sunshine garden that they have in the parking lot there. So you can park there in the parking lot, just not directly in front of the businesses, leave a few spaces for them, so that way their patrons aren't affected. And then there's a big old parking lot in front of the Shriners. But yeah, you just walk along the side there of the building, and then all of a sudden you come across this amazingly just gigantic field that you wouldn't anticipate being there at all. And it borders with a lot of the houses that are there. So we've gotten questions where people are like, how do the people of the neighborhood actually feel about this? And a lot of them come to the festival.
They love it.
They're like, I mean, we did a light show for the finale. I don't know how that went over, but it was an amazing light show. I was just like, this is blowing my mind with how fabulous these guys did setting up the lights. I can't take credit for it. I didn't do that light setup, but it looked incredible. So people seem to just really be drawn to it. They like it because they can just walk over. Yeah. And really it's to cater to Southland Drive in particular, but of course, Central Kentucky and beyond. Yeah. We started it because the Southland Jamboree ended up having to move. There was some construction that happened. Initially, they were at the bowling alley kind of parking lot area. Some construction happened there, and all of a sudden there was this void of the music no longer being there. And so Brandon Pittard, as I mentioned, Gareth Evans, Chris Smith, and Seth Murphy decided, hey, let's go ahead and let's start this amazing festival, because really Southland Drive has such a robust history of music. It was called Music Row at one point. And so they wanted to make sure to honor that and really offer opportunities to more local artists that weren't really maybe getting it quite as often as they could. And this has helped sort of catapult some of those bands as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to do a free ad here for McLeod's Coffee House.
Yes.
It's one of my favorite places to hang out. So you could go to McLeod's and then walk over and look at the field behind the Shriners.
Exactly. Especially in April. April this year was surprisingly chilly. So you'll see the video when you go to look on our YouTube station or YouTube channel. We are going to be dropping videos here coming up in the next several weeks. And there's people with blankets. And so McLeod's would be great. Go and get you a hot chocolate or a coffee. Yeah. Come on over with your nice warm beverage. Yeah. Sit down under a blanket and just get to listen to some fun music.
Sure. So you have a YouTube channel for this?
Yeah, you can just look up Tall Sound on YouTube. Okay. We also have a website, tallsound.com, and that's where you can find out about the internship program that I'm actually in the process of developing. And you can find out about past acts that have been there. You can see some video there as well. You can find out what's going to be happening the next season as soon as the details are announced. So it's honestly, I'm not just saying this to make people want to come, but I'm genuinely saying this. This has been really a life-altering experience for me because, for one, it's a fun event. Like, I miss when it's not happening. It's exhausting. I won't lie. It's exhausting, but I love it. And the fact that we're not in season at the moment, I'm missing the people that I'm working with. This started off as a volunteer-run organization, and these guys have put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into making this what it is, and to see and hear about the growth that they've had, it speaks volumes to what they're offering our community. And so it's run by an amazing group of fellas, and I'm proud to be a part of it and to be able to help continue with their mission of growth. And I mentioned just a second ago, internship program. We're going to be working with BCTC and possibly a couple of other educational organizations to have students have the opportunity to come in for videography and maybe some experience if you want to learn about lighting and sound as well. And we do also have a partnership with Lexington Music Education. We've had a battle of the bands happen that Gareth had gone and helped judge, and the winners from that ended up getting to come and actually do curtain warming for us. So they were able to be the opening acts, in essence, for each of our dates that we had. Yeah.
So is this like at Moon Dance where you bring your own chair? Okay.
Yeah, we have that. That's definitely an option where you can absolutely bring a blanket chair, whatever you'd like. And we also do have the Friends of Tall Sound tables, so you can go online. And there we have a table. It can fit about 6 to 8 people on, and it's right near our audio booth, so you get a pretty great front row spot there. And you can go ahead and look online for more details for that at tallsound.com, and that comes with a donation, and that'll help continue to allow us to fund to do awesome things for this festival and get to have the vendors that we do have come in. Sav's Ice Cream is one of our big ones.
I'm sold.
Yeah, exactly right. We have these amazing artists that come in, like Chill. He has these artisan spoons that he makes. We've had people that come in and done caricatures, and we have just so many different amazing artists here in the area that we're trying to be able to help and give the opportunity to get exposed to more people maybe that didn't know they were there.
Well, there's got to be somebody listening to this that's thinking the same thing I am right now. It's like, how did I not know about this?
Right? I was there just a year ago.
Wow.
I stumbled upon it because they do partner with the Southland Street Fair. And so that's the only date, which is usually in June, where we are not on that fourth Sunday. So that's usually on a Saturday. And I stumbled upon it back in 2022. I'm like, what is this? There's a band performing here, and there's a bunch of, what is going on? And then it just sort of left my brain. And then I stumbled upon, through a mutual contact of Gareth and I's, and he's like, hey, you want to come do this? And I was like, wait a minute, what's going on? And so ever since, I've been hooked.
Well, I think that's why we were supposed to be doing this podcast, so we can get the word out about that. I'm going to be looking up that field on Google Maps too. That'll be interesting. Well, I have to say this popped into my head here, listening to you, how, and I hope this is all right to say, how great your voice sounds through my headset here. And I know that's how it will come across in the podcast. And I did see in some information about you that you have done some voiceover work. Could you just take a moment and tell us a little bit about that?
Well, sure. And thank you for the compliment, Tom.
Sure.
So I did do a voiceover for CASA of Lexington, which is court-appointed special advocates for children. And it's a nonprofit that serves abused and neglected kids, serving central Kentucky and 7 different counties. It's the biggest CASA in not only Kentucky, but also in the nation. It's one of the biggest ones. And I think it's incredible. And so one of our mutual Lexington podcaster friends, Troy Price, he's working with them, and he asked for about 10 or 12 of us to see if we would volunteer to go ahead and send over a recording. And so he sent us a script, and they decided to use mine. I sent over 4 versions, so maybe that helped me a little bit. Sure. But I had a different tone for every single one, and they immediately picked the one that Troy said that he thought they would. And so they're going to have that promotion dropping here soon in the near future. But when I found out what the organization was, I was very touched, because we do have a lot of kids who do need to have some kind of advocate and some kind of representation. A lot of times they are overlooked. And the fact that this organization is doing what they're doing, a lot of them are volunteers. It's absolutely incredible. So I felt very honored to have been able to be a part of that.
Great. So the segment that you of audio that you recorded, about what length was that? About a
minute and a half. And it just talks about how they were celebrating their anniversary and some of the things that they do and they stand for. And it's a great, not only like visually to get to see, because the videography for it was done really well, but also just getting to read those words and what they stand for and what they're trying to do and their mission is. It's pretty incredible.
Did you enjoy it, doing voiceover?
I did. Of course, I'm super judgmental of myself. No one can ever judge me as hard as I will myself. Yeah. And so I'm like, that one's not good enough. So it took me way longer than it should have. Yeah. But that's why I did 4 versions. I'm like, surely one of them has to be it.
Yeah. I did some voiceover one time for a construction industry related thing. And it was amazing how much time you can spend on a minute and a half.
Yes. It's like, it should not take me an hour to do this, but perfectionists, that's where our struggle comes into play.
And CASA, again, what's the organization?
It's the court-appointed special advocates for children of Lexington and the surrounding counties.
Great. Well, thank you. Yeah. And then the final thing that I had in mind to bring up, I know I've heard you say that you have an interest, a personal interest in the field of mental health. Would you go into a little detail about that?
Sure, absolutely. So people are fascinating. You have so many different types of people, so many different past experiences. And I mentioned my sister has gone into mental health, and I'm really proud of her for how much she's advanced in her career already at the tender age of 26, 27. So very proud of her for what she's done. And while I'm not specifically in it professionally, I love talking to people. I love hearing their stories. And we all have some kind of trauma or some kind of negative experiences that we've dealt with. I've dealt with anxiety since 2nd grade, depression since 7th, and PTSD from a trauma back in 2012. Those are things that you carry with you your whole life. And being able to talk to somebody, to a therapist, or maybe if you don't feel comfortable talking to a therapist, talking to a friend, it's important to get it off your chest, because those monsters never go away. They will always be present. And we all are born with, as my therapist likes to put it, Cheryl, a toolbox. We sometimes are lacking some of those tools, and that's okay, because that's what we were given. But sometimes we maybe need a little help to get a couple more of those tools to help us from day to day, from experience to experience. So mental health, to me, it's something that if I didn't start seeing a therapist, I don't know honestly where I'd be right now. I know I wouldn't have as much self-confidence as I now do. If you talked to me a year ago, I did not really have much self-confidence. But in a year, therapy has made me just sort of ditch a lot of the self-judgment I was having, because no one will be able to judge me as harshly as I can myself. So it's taught me how to be a stronger person. It's taught me that it's okay when you're not strong. So I think there's a lot of stigma and a lot of judgment that is still attached to it. I know we've made a lot of great progress, but when you can let down your guard for someone who is completely unbiased and really they're there to help you, they're not there to judge you.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can just let down that guard, if you're someone who's like, I don't know about this therapy thing, I don't know about mental health, trust me, if you just let the guard down and you can get with a therapist that's able to help you and feels right and is the right fit, it's going to be completely life-changing, because it has been for me. And, if even if I'm not a therapist, I like to help people. I like to talk to them. It's part of why I'm involved with the organizations I am, and just being able to help people. It's a good feeling for me. And I know that's something that a lot of people also have. So if you are someone who's struggling, or you know someone who is, just start a conversation and just address what's going on. And you're going to start at surface level and you're going to find out that root goes way further down than you thought it did. So excavating the past is important, and not just letting that sit, and don't suffer when you don't have to. I think that's a massive thing I learned. Perspective is so important when it comes to it. And when you learn you don't have to suffer, you don't have to just hold on to it, it's very freeing to be able to let it go.
I sense another podcast coming sometime here.
I would love to. In the future, that's a goal, but we'll get through some of our other things we need to establish first.
Sure. Well, great. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Welcome.
Well, this has been a great conversation, and I really appreciate you taking the time to get together with me to do this. Before we close with Bluegrass Region highlights, is there anything that you wanted to talk about? You can pause a moment and think about that. Anything that you wanted to talk about that I have failed to bring up?
Just reminders that the 12 Lions Film Festival, we're going to have our submission opening after the first of the year. Tall Sound happens April through September, fourth Sunday of each month, except for when the Southland Street Fair happens in June. And just support your local artists. That's very important. We all enjoy watching our TV and our movies, but without our artists, we can't do that. So especially with the strike recently ending, very exciting for a lot of people I know who work in the industry, and people who I don't, where they're able to start giving us some new content, because I know we're all like biting at the bit for it. So
yeah. Support your local artists. That's a great way to end right there.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Well, I always end Bluegrass Region Voices and Views with a segment I call Bluegrass Region Highlights, with these two questions. So tell us about a favorite coffee shop or restaurant, or it could be both, in Kentucky. It could be any place in the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
Oh gosh, it's such a hard question to answer, because there's so many good ones. Just in terms of coffee, Kenwick Table is usually a fun spot I like to go to. Also, Martine's is great. She's more of a French baker, and her chicken salad, oh my gosh, it's phenomenal. 610 Magnolia out of Louisville has become what we call our fancy friends annual dinner, with a few of my friends and I, two of which have been on the podcast, Kenny and John. And it's a tasting menu from Chef Edward Lee, and he was on one of the seasons of Top Chef. And the food there is phenomenal. Each time I've gone, it's just, chef's kiss, as they say. It's great. I love it. But yeah, I have a list. I could keep going. Big Kahuna's great if you haven't had that. Great Hawaiian food. Yeah. It's now, I consider it comfort food. And I mean, I have just a giant list that I don't want to burden you with. But if you go to my podcast and listen, I have talked about many of them.
I'm thinking, Tom, you didn't stop and think who you're asking this question of. I really didn't. It's like, that is funny.
I literally have a dozen of them written down, and I'm like, I'm not going to do that. So listen to my podcast, and you'll hear about it.
Sometimes I've actually had one person tell me that I don't have any favorite. That actually.
We need to have a lunch at some point. This person
really,
and I.
That's funny. And then, what's a favorite place or venue or activity in Kentucky that you maybe like to visit, just on your own when you have some free time, or maybe it's a place that if you had an out of town guest, you'd want to take them there to show off the culture of the state of Kentucky.
I think here in Lexington, the distillery district is great because you're getting a little bit of everything. You're getting different, distributors, whether it's a cider house or it's Crank and Boom ice cream or it's Goodfellas Pizza, the Burl Arcade and concert venues right across the street. It's such a great little spot that's currently just booming with growth. So that's great here in Lexington. Otherwise, if you want to take something maybe off the beaten path a little bit, Wilson's Nurseries and Sage Garden Cafe, they're in Frankfort.
Oh.
It's this giant greenhouse and they got cats walking around and it's just a really lovely afternoon. I'll go with some friends and we'll go and we'll look at plants and stuff. We'll grab our food and have a really lovely afternoon. So it's a nice relaxing time. Very therapeutic.
Great. Well, thank you. Place I had not heard of.
Yeah.
Well, there will be links in the show notes. But,
yes.
Well, Kali, it's been a pleasure getting to know you a little deeper here than what we are able to do just in our conversations at the Bronte Bistro as we're having our Lexington Podcasters meet up. And I really sincerely look forward to seeing what you do over the next year with a number of these projects, but especially the nonprofit that you're starting up. And we will get back together and do a podcast and catch up on what's transpired a year or so from now. So thank you.
Would love that. Thank you very much, Tom.
Appreciate it. Thank you. I'm looking forward to checking out the events that Kali mentioned when they start back up in 2024. There are links to their websites and other things we talked about on my website at www.bluegrassregionvoicesandviews.com/Kali. That's Kali. You can listen to Kali's podcast on your favorite podcast app by searching for Foodies Reviewing Movies Podcast by Kali Matthews. Thanks for listening.